That's kind of cool. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Scrow, and I'm going to be talking to you a bit today about SkyDrive Pro. Before we talk about SkyDrive Pro, which is really, really cool, I want to talk to you about my favorite thing, myself. I've been at Microsoft for about 5 years. In that time, I've worked in the Office group out in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've worked for Microsoft IT out in Redmond, Washington, and I've also spent some time with Microsoft Research out in Beijing. So if you guys don't ask any questions, I'm going to regale you with all kinds of stories about what it's like to work at Microsoft. So please prepare your questions as you're looking through this presentation. Before I get you guys going with slides, I want to show you a real quick demo that illustrates the power of SkyDrive Pro. Some of you folks who were at the keynote this morning, you're going to switch. Some of you folks who were at the keynote this morning saw Jeff do a demo of sharing from backstage. I want to show that yet again. So this is a document that lives in SkyDrive Pro. And directly from the backstage, I can go and initiate a collaboration experience with some folks. So I'm in the backstage of Office 2013. I see this information here. I see currently that this document is shared with anyone who has a link, and I can go ahead and add some other folks to it. As I begin typing, I get an autocomplete. Here we are. We'll share with Kim Abercrombie. I'm going to include a quick note to her. Click Share. And just like that, this document, Kim will now have access to it. And it will refresh in a moment. Okay, well, Kim, once she has access to it, she will show up in that bottom portion where it says Shared With. So you'd see Yale Lee, and then you'd see Kim Abercrombie. So that's the quick demo. So today, we're going to talk about a couple things. I'm going to give you a real high-level overview of SkyDrive Pro. We're going to talk a little bit about the thinking that went into the project. You heard Jeff talk about that a little bit today. I'm going to expand and elaborate on some of those concepts. I'm going to also help you understand the context, the business context that this app is going into. We're going to talk about, in depth, the web experience. So some of the things that you saw Jeff demo today, we're going to go a little bit deeper there. Then we're going to talk about SkyDrive Pro in apps. So how it shows itself up in Office, what the presentation's like on mobile devices, and other points of integration. When we're done with that, we'll wrap up with a couple considerations for admins, a few things to think about, and then a little bit of a snapshot of the vision. You saw some cool stuff at the keynote today with the Windows 8 app. We'll talk about some other things. It's going to be exciting. So, when you think about some of the principles that we've approached SharePoint 2013 with, you've seen these maybe in some other presentations or throughout the day today. SkyDrive Pro really hits on 3 of these key principles. The first is the concept of organization. We think of SkyDrive Pro as a place for folks to store their content, to organize it in a way that's meaningful for them. Once they've organized their content in a way that's meaningful for them, they can begin a collaboration experience. They can share, both with users internal to their organization and folks who may be outside. Additionally, as you put content in SkyDrive Pro and you begin those collaboration experiences, it helps you discover other information, other folks who may be interested in similar concepts. So, in terms of the approach, when we started out thinking about SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2010 had just released. We'd built a lot of great features and functionality in SharePoint 2010, a lot of awesome things. You folks may remember, I was at SharePoint conference that year. It was amazing. This year's no different. A lot of amazing things coming out of SharePoint. But when we think about where we were, we had built great features and functionality. So it's tough to one-up that. And this comes to a little bit of how we approach things internally. So Jeff today talked about revising and rethinking and re-envisioning some of those user experiences. I think about it a little bit more simply. I think about it as a heart. We wanted to make SharePoint And as part of that, the SkyDrive Pro aspects, something that folks wouldn't just tolerate. They would want to go there. It would be something that would be helpful for them. Experiences that would be crave-worthy. We also think about SharePoint as we were approaching 2013 in terms of the cloud. So we build these great user experiences. We want it to be really awesome. But then there's this whole notion of the service. Great user experiences that also scale. Not thinking about things in terms of 1 or 2 users, but in terms of millions and millions of users. Making sure our features will make sense in that world. That they allow us to provide an affordable service for all folks like you. That's one aspect. That's almost like the design way that we approach things. We also did some work to develop a few personas. Now, for folks who are familiar, Gartner, Forrester, you read those reports, they have personas. There's a CIO, maybe there's a technical architect, and they write papers and information towards those folks. Well, we designed with a few personas in mind. And these folks were Brian and Armando. And when thinking about Brian and Armando, they're really our check to make sure that we're building crave-worthy user experiences that are scalable. So Brian and Armando, there's quite high switching costs for these guys. They don't really like to change the way that they do things. The experiences that we made needed to be so great that these folks were willing to switch and were excited to use SharePoint. So a little bit by the numbers, just to drive some of these points home. One thing that we do know about folks like Brian and Armando, the users and organizations, they blend work and personal. In between meetings at work, they're scheduling a doctor's appointment for their daughter. At halftime of the soccer game, they're responding to emails. There's not really a clear line. They also work from many locations. No longer do they just work in the office, as we said before. They're doing work on the train. They're doing work as they're commuting. There's a number of different places that these folks are working, and it's important for us to have a cloud scalable experience for them. There's also many devices. Most of the folks in this bracket, more than half report using 3+ devices for work. So we need to make sure that we have a delightful cross-platform experience. And then one number that really just drives it home. By 2018, there's going to be 865 million folks, just like Brian and Armando, out in the working world. And this is actually a growth from 600 million that are there today. So quite a large increase. And that puts us in there's a number of interesting business problems that arise with this. So in terms of the business context, when you've got users moving from all of these different devices, working from multiple locations, blending cloud and personal, these experiences, there's really this massive growth in this space. So I've used, maybe it's a competitive solution, maybe it's SkyDrive, but those things are growing massively. And that puts IT in a tricky position. Some of those solutions, really great manageability features, but maybe they don't scale. Some others, really easy collab, but there's no security. You can just share with whoever you want. So from IT's perspective, there's not really a clear winner. And with that blending of work and personal, there's a massive shift in expectations. Having the solution that IT mandates is no longer enough. Both with the consumerization of IT and the growth of bring your own devices, users have a consumer-grade expectation. And with all of this context in mind, now we can really start the presentation. What is SkyDrive Pro? SkyDrive Pro is cloud storage for users. It's on the cloud, it's available on-premise, and it's under your control. It's easy to manage because it's part of SharePoint. One of the largest misconceptions that I've chatted with folks about is that SkyDrive Pro is something different. It's something special. It's a unique service that we've stood up. It's part of SharePoint, and it's part of SharePoint 2013. As part of the experiences that we built when we think about the SkyDrive Pro ecosystem, SkyDrive Pro is available online, either on the intranet or on the cloud. It's available offline with our really awesome sync client. We also serve it up in apps, both in the Windows Phone, and as you saw today, there's some work about going on in Windows 8 and iOS. Questions at the end, please. So one of the questions that comes up, okay, so there's a SkyDrive thing, there's a SkyDrive Pro thing. The experiences are very similar. So what content goes where? Things like your vacation pictures, your favorite recipe for chili, maybe your baseball team's schedule. Those things are for SkyDrive. SkyDrive Pro, that's the place where you put the pictures from your morale event that you're having in Vegas. Well, maybe not the pictures from the morale event in Vegas, but the morale event that you had back home with your team. Specification documents. SkyDrive Pro is also the place where I put my draft SharePoint conference presentation. So it had the tools, just like the consumer service, that allow me to collaborate very easily on these things. So with an understanding of SkyDrive Pro at a very high level, let's dive into the web experience. So, as I said before, on the web, SkyDrive Pro is a special document library. For folks that may remember the My Sites in SharePoint 2010, there were a few concepts. There's a personal document library, and there was a shared document library. I put things in personal, and I was the only person who had access to them. I put documents in shared when I wanted everyone in the organization to have access to them. Awesome feature. In SharePoint 2013, we've evolved that concept. We've evolved that concept into SkyDrive Pro. Because we've simplified the experience around sharing and around managing access, we've made it very easy for folks to initiate collaboration. You no longer have to worry about putting things in, okay, if I put it in personal, only I'm going to have access to it, and then at some point later I have to move it into shared. No. You can put that all in one place. And when you're ready, you can initiate collaboration. Once you've shared, the next step is, okay, I've shared a couple times, maybe I have to add a few people or manage access. Somebody left the team, somebody's transitioned to another project. It's also easy to manage access. And most importantly, we know access control is important. Folks may remember a few weeks ago, some financial results leaked for a large software company, and their share price went down. There were folks who were impacted by that. Maybe that was done maliciously, maybe that was done by accident. But knowing who has access to your documents and your content at any given time is very important, and it's one of the themes that cuts through SkyDrive Pro. And it's one of the things that you'll see is a differentiator from just a regular document library. It's one of the things that makes SkyDrive Pro special. So enough from the slides, transition to the demo. Just a second. I've got backup screenshots, but I'd much rather demo live for you guys. No, there we are. So as you saw in Jeff's keynote, we've evolved the user experience of SharePoint. Some of the things that you see across the top navigation, Outlook, Calendar, People, my personal information management experience there. I also see Newsfeed, SkyDrive, Sites. As we come into the page, you'll notice pictures. Pictures featuring more prominently. Yale has decided a representation of himself is best done by his bulldog. That bulldog's important. It identifies Yale. It says something about Yale. But as we go through, other folks, if they had chosen to upload pictures, would have great pictures here. This is important because it helps you understand where you are. It serves as a second element of navigation. As we come into SkyDrive Pro, I know that this is my SkyDrive Pro because I see my picture there. There's no doubt in my mind that this is my stuff unless there's another bulldog lover at the company. But in terms of SkyDrive Pro, there's a lot that's similar between SkyDrive Pro and document libraries. And we'll talk through that, and then we'll go into some of the awesomeness that SkyDrive Pro has to offer. One of the first things that you'll notice is this welcome text. It doesn't actually refer to the service as SkyDrive Pro. It refers to it as SkyDrive at Sharkley. That's the name of this tenancy. That's the name of the company where Yale works. And one of the cool things that we've got in SharePoint 2013 is a lot more support to help users get onboarded. So I'm here. You'll see a little message bar. Other pages have things like this. But in terms of SkyDrive Pro, we see it's a place to store, sync, and share your work. Sounds kind of like what we talked about before. And then we note that things are private until shared. So that's the first of many mentions. The first time that you hit this page, you should feel comfortable putting your content up here because you're the only one who has access to it. As we navigate deeper into the page, we've got the ability to new documents, which you all saw this morning, really cool. But I see the sharing column. At a glance, I can see who has access to my stuff and whether it's private or not. In addition, one of the features that we've got that's unique to SkyDrive Pro is a folder that's shared with everyone. So this is shared with everyone in your tenancy or in your company. So you've got that one just really easy, I can go ahead and share with those folks. So if I look at that, I can see that it's shared. If I look at lessons learned, I can see that it's actually just me. It's private. If I go into lessons learned, now I need to share this with Kim. We've been working together closely on a project. I'm brought to the permissions page. So if multiple folks had access, I could see their pictures again, their name, their title. I could also see what control level they had. From this page, I can just go and invite folks. And now you've seen this backstage from the PowerPoint that we did before, but we'll see it again here. Similar experience to what you saw backstage. You also see yet again, I'm reminded that this is private. This is private. I'm the only one who can see that. I can go ahead and start typing. Autocomplete will show up. I see Kim Abercrombie, the intern, in here. I can select her. I can also change her permission level. Now, when we think about simplified sharing, one of the things that we needed to think about was making sure that these were meaningful terms for users. Contribute, owner, editor, all the other 14 permission buckets that we all know and love from SharePoint 2010. We needed a few that were really meaningful for users. Edit and view. Comfortable terms. Folks feel really confident that they know what's going to happen. Going to give Kim permission to edit because we need to collaborate on this doc. Type a quick message here. And there's a few things that are going to happen after I share. The first is I'm going to see confirmation. So this just lets me know, okay, right, I've shared this with Kim. Everything's gone well. Kim will receive an email notification that says, Yale is sharing this document with you. In addition, the sharing hint has changed. So we've gone through the sharing experience. The sharing hint has gone from private to shared. If I click into here, I can see again, there's Kim. Every step of the way, I have confidence with who's got access. In addition, if I open the call out, I see it yet again. That same shared with Kim Abercrombie. Now this is a really great way for folks, once you begin collaboration, Oftentimes people make changes to your document. You're not exactly sure. You see, oh, it's modified by Kim Abercrombie. What did she do? You can look through a rich preview right here on the callout. And this is one of those features that exists on both regular document libraries and as part of SkyDrive Pro. So the ability to have this rich preview for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint documents. And it's actually built on top of the WAC. It's one of my favorite features. So coming back to the slides, there we are. So there's a couple things to remember when you think about SkyDrive Pro. The first is SkyDrive Pro is about personal storage. So users today, they have My Documents. Think of this as a cloud-based replacement for My Documents, under your control, because it is part of SharePoint. It's also important to remember SkyDrive Pro is private by default. You saw all those security-related features, private by default. In terms of storage, for folks who choose an O365 subscription featuring SharePoint Online, 7 gigs of space is what users are given. And for folks on-premise with SharePoint 2013, the default is 100 megs, but just like any other document library in SharePoint, that is configurable. You also saw the sharing hint, the iconographic notification, a lock, or some people standing next to each other, letting users know whether it's private or shared. In addition, you saw the really quick access control screen. So I'm able to view everyone's permissions, their picture, and their permission levels. From that screen, I can make changes. I can remove people. I can also, if I'm a power user and I feel comfortable in what would be the 2010 permissions page, I can navigate right in there and begin to manage my permissions that way. And in addition, you saw examples of both internal and external collaboration. So I can just as easily put Kim Abercrombie from Sharkly as I can Kim Abercrombie at Outlook or Kim Abercrombie at Gmail. So with the web in mind, we realize that SkyDrive Pro content is important. And in order to make sure folks are getting the most out of their SkyDrive Pro experience, there's a few different apps that folks can use. There's a few different ways to engage with the information on SkyDrive Pro. The first is the Office Sync client. We'll see a demo of that in a little bit. Jeff alluded to it. Keeps my content with me as I travel. It's available offline. Changes things. It's pretty cool. It's also available backstage and as part of the most recently used in the Office apps. So for folks who maybe haven't used SharePoint 2013, or for folks who are maybe new to it or don't have it hooked up to Office 2013, from the backstage of documents, or from the backstage of files, as you saw, I can share. It's also going to show up as a save location for folks so they can save directly to their SkyDrive Pro. And in addition, it'll be part of the most recently used experience in Office apps. And in addition to that, it's also integrated as part of the Windows Phone Office Hub. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these and then demo a few things. So the Sync client app. This is part of Office today. It's part of Office 2013 Standard and Pro Plus, both volume license and retail. In addition, for folks who have Office 365 subscriptions, at the Pro Plus or the Small Business Premium level, it's available through that. It is a classic Windows Sync client. What you saw Jeff demo today was the modern, or the WinRT version, representation of your SkyDrive Pro content. That's not what we're talking about here. And at a very, very high level, this app creates a desktop favorite that's synchronized to your SkyDrive Pro. making your content available to you whether you're connected to the service or not. So how does it sync? Start talking about sync clients. That's the first question that everybody wants to ask. Engineers love building sync clients. Everyone handles it a little bit differently. I'll talk to you about how we do it in SkyDrive Pro today. We sync, I like to think of this as we sync intelligently. We sync first automatically. So if your user's making changes to documents that are in SkyDrive Pro, they don't need to sit there and mash the sync button to make sure those changes make it up to the server. They don't need to go check on the web experience and make sure that those documents made it up there. We handle it automatically, approximately once every 10 minutes. Yeah, no problem. In the back, did you guys hear that? Good. We sync automatically, and we're intelligent about it. That's the adaptive piece. So if you're working along in SkyDrive Pro, we'll synchronize once every 10 minutes. If server health begins to degrade, we'll back off our sync interval. And we'll back off. We'll go from once every 10 minutes to once every 30, and then 60, and so on. We'll continue to increase the time between syncs. And in addition, for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, after initial file download, we do just sync the differentials. And one of the important things to note is this sync client, it works against SkyDrive Pro as part of SharePoint 2013. It also works against other document libraries in SharePoint 2013. So I know that this is a 200 level session, so I won't bust out any crazy architecture, but I wanted folks to understand a little bit about how we're built in terms of the SkyDrive Pro Sync Client app. So the easiest way to think about it is there's a thin layer of SkyDrive Pro UI. That interface sits on top of shared Office client storage. So that's storage that's used by Word, Excel, PowerPoint, the other Office apps. That shared Office client storage then handles the synchronization with SharePoint 2013 and the SkyDrive Pro service. That's where our diff sync, the differentials, that's where that comes from. So you saw how we're integrated architecturally with the Office suite. In addition, in the backstage of Office documents, you have the ability to share. Saw a quick demo of that before. It's also another place where at a glance I see who's got access to my document. In addition, SkyDrive Pro is integrated as a save location from the backstage of Office apps. So once you're up and running with SkyDrive Pro, you're signed into Office, we know that you've got a SkyDrive Pro location, and you have the ability to save directly to that. In addition, SkyDrive Pro documents, as you're opening them, will show up in your roaming most recently used list. So for folks that are signed in, as you open documents, they will roam with you, or at least the URLs to those documents will roam with you. So I also mentioned integration with Office Hub. Now, I don't have a really cool demo for this. I just have a couple slides that show you the experience. Please forgive me. So I've signed up, I've signed in, I've added either an on-premise Exchange account or I've added an O365 account. Once that account is added, when I navigate into Office, I'll see my SkyDrive at, in this case, SkyDrive at Microsoft, or SkyDrive at company name. And then I can go into that and actually navigate through. There's a folder I've got called Personal, a folder called Shared with Everyone. So that information's in there pretty much automatically as part of the account setup process on the Windows Phone. So with that, I'm going to change gears here a bit and show you a quick demo of the sync client. So I'm in my SkyDrive Pro, and I've got this quick navigation bar at the top. Right below that, I've got the sync option. Now this is the same on any team site or other place where you have a document library. On my site, click sync. That will begin synchronizing the documents down. I'll be prompted, and I think I'm already set up on this device. Yeah, I am already set up. So, in this case, my files are syncing as we speak because I've already set up the sync process. It's just going to open me into that. So, I can click Show My Files. As you'll see, for folks who've used the SkyDrive app, the experience is nearly identical. Once I initiate the sync, I've got a favorite that shows up on my desktop, SkyDrive Pro. I've got these different icons, the overlays. That's letting me know that everything's up to date. Right now, I'm incredibly confident that if connectivity went down, it's been pretty spotty at the conference from what I've heard. If connectivity went away, I've got all my documents with me. I could go ahead and continue right through with my presentation. Even though it's on the server, I can work on it right here. As I'm working on it, my changes will wait until I have connectivity. When I'm connected again, they will then sync up with the server-based version of the file. I also have integration with the context menu. So partnership at Northwind. If I right-click on this, I can see there's a SkyDrive Pro action here in the context menu, and I've got a couple options. So there's a lot of instances when you're working with folks and they say, oh, can you send me a link to that document? Well, you could go into SharePoint and get it. Totally normal way to get it. Additionally, if you don't have a web browser open or you happen to be working in your documents, you can copy the link right from here, send it to them. You can also initiate the sharing experience or launch into the browser. So if I go in partnership with Northwind and click share, it's going to bring me to the web experience. With that sharing dialog open that we saw before, I see that it's unshared. I can go ahead and share. In addition, we talked before about the backstage sharing. One of the things that I can also do backstage is this get a sharing link. So sometimes I want to collaborate with folks, or I have to send out a document for broad review, working with a large number of folks who may or may not have access. One of the really easy ways to do that is I could attach a document, but then maybe I deal with multiple different versions, edits coming in, it gets kind of crazy. Or maybe I just want them to take a look at it. I actually don't really want them to make any changes. I can get a sharing link from the backstage, and this creates a link that anyone who has that link will have access to either view or view and edit the document. I can also disable those links from the backstage when they're available. And then we're going to go back over here. So a couple things to remember. We talked about the apps. The synchronization app, it is an automatic adaptive sync. So as we said, users don't need to go and mash the sync button or anything like that. We also want to respect server health. If the server health begins to degrade, we will increase the time between our syncs. As we said, for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, we just sync the differentials, so just the changes. If you make some edits to a Word document on page 10, we only sync those edits. We don't sync the other 9 pages that have remained unchanged. For PowerPoints, it's at the slide level, and for Excel, I believe it's at the worksheet level. The SkyDrive Pro Office Client app, it syncs both SkyDrive Pro content and other document libraries. So you can bring those with you. They're available offline with you. In addition, you saw a couple of screenshots of our integration with the Office Hub. So once I set up my Exchange account or my O365 account, we will pull down your SkyDrive Pro information. You also saw now a couple times from the backstage. There's a great sharing experience backstage. That's the same as the experience that you see in the browser. In addition, you have the ability to manage anonymous links. So if you need to share with folks who maybe are outside your organization, or you're unsure who may have access, you can do that very easily from the backstage. So we've talked about a lot today. We've covered a bunch of ground, a lot of different things going on with SkyDrive Pro. There's a few things for admins that I want to hit on. Upgrade is always a big consideration. This is one of the awesome new features of SharePoint 2013, but a lot of folks in the room have deployed SharePoint 2010. Maybe they've even deployed the SharePoint 2010 My Site functionality, and they've got folks actively up and running and collaborating using their personal and their shared. How do we handle that on upgrade? Well, we do. We make it very easy for both users and admins to migrate their content from those libraries into SkyDrive Pro. We'll take everything that was in the personal library, so folks remember that's the library that was only I had access to. Everything in the personal library, take that hierarchy and we'll move that into the root of SkyDrive Pro. The personal library, only I have access to. SkyDrive Pro, only I have access to. Everything that was in shared, so that was the document library that everyone in the organization had access to. We'll take that content and we'll move that hierarchy into the shared with everyone folder. For other document libraries that may exist, so sometimes users create different document libraries for different projects that they're working on. We'll take those document libraries and we'll move them into folders at the root of SkyDrive Pro. And then once we've got everything moved over, all the content's happy and safe in its new home, we'll go ahead and remove those old document libraries. Simplify the navigation for the user. Beyond just the upgrade, there's always a consideration around external users. Different organizations have different requirements here. Some organizations are totally comfortable with users being able to share with whomever. They work with a number of vendors. They're not going to provision access to SharePoint for all of those folks. You can disable or enable external user sharing from within the admin UI. So you've got that option available to you. And in addition, there's a number of the apps that we talked about today to consider. So in terms of the SkyDrive Pro app on Windows Phone, that's, I think, a great thing to deploy, but organizationally, there may be some challenges there. The desktop app itself, a lot of times organizations may have a legal requirement around where data can and can't live. You do have the ability to disable the syncing functionality. You can disable it on SharePoint, or you can choose not to deploy the app. So these are just a few of the considerations that admins may have to think through in terms of SkyDrive Pro. Now, I promised at the beginning I wanted to share a little bit of our thinking going forward. You saw some of this from Jeff Teeper earlier today. So in the near term, we want to make SharePoint available on Windows 8 in a modern sense, and to make it available on iOS, as Jeff mentioned. Great SkyDrive Pro experiences in both modern and iOS. In addition, we want to make it even easier for folks to buy more space in SkyDrive Pro and to adjust the space available that they may have, that their users may have access to. Longer term, we hope to continue to enable cross-platform experiences. So we know SkyDrive Pro content is important. It's important to your users. It's going to be the home of a lot of great documents. And we know that users, there's a number of different devices out there, as we saw in the beginning. Brian and Armando, more than half of folks like Brian and Armando have 3 or more devices that they use to get their job done on a daily basis. We want to make sure that we enable that experience. And we also want to make sure that the experience is great on each of those platforms. So we've covered a lot today, and going earlier in the week, I have the advantage to cover a lot of different things, different parts of SharePoint. These are a few of the other sessions that you may want to attend. So we've talked about sharing at a high level. This was by no means an in-depth exploration. Tomorrow, there's a session on sharing where my colleagues will go over at an in-depth level how sharing works on both the on-premise solution and as part of SharePoint Online. In addition, there's a session on the mobile apps and the new SharePoint apps. So how does SharePoint present itself on mobile platforms, and what are the specific awesome apps that we're building to showcase it? We talked about the call-out. You saw the cool preview. You also saw some of the people. All of that is extensible. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than what we talked about today. But if you're interested in that, you can attend the Building Apps seminar. That's SPC 028. Now on Wednesday, at Table 3 for Ask the Experts, we'll be available to answer any SkyDrive Pro questions you have, or really any questions about document libraries in SharePoint. We're happy to help and chat about that. And then for folks who are interested, you want to come by, you want to talk more, you want to see a quick demo, we're over in the SharePoint Pavilion. There's a section of booths for ECM-related topics, so there's some social collab, there's search, there's a few of those. We'll be in that area. We don't actually have a dedicated booth, but we'll be in that area. So you can go ahead and evaluate this session. You can be queuing up for questions. As I said, my name is Richard Scrow. Thank you.
Sorry, is this on?
Yeah, it's on now.
One quick question. With the offline sync, how does it handle managed metadata and such? Has it got a rich story around that? Or
Can you step back from the mic? I'm really having trouble hearing. Or speak louder.
Sorry, yeah. Managed metadata in the offline sync?
Okay. So the question is, how does the offline sync handle managed metadata? So in terms of like required metadata that you may have on a document, if you go and make changes to a document, a piece of required metadata is, let's say, missing from that document, we will pend the upload and then have folks go through the in-app experience to resolve that. But we handle it the same way that SharePoint does if you were to bring a document into SharePoint that didn't have all of the metadata on it. We will leave the document checked out to you until you make those changes. So other questions? Good? Yeah, you?
I have 2 questions.
Yep.
Does your iOS offering cover the Mac OS for laptops and desktops?
So the first question is, does the iOS offering cover Mac OS, desktops, and laptops? So no comment on that right now. We're still in the throes of development. Our goal, as I said, long term, is to bring great SkyDrive Pro experiences to all platforms. But for right now, with work we're in development, we're not really going to comment on that. Okay. Second question?
Is there content that you would recommend not putting in SkyDrive Pro, such as PSTs or Access databases or things like that you've seen issues with syncing?
Can we turn the question mic up? I can't hear these guys. So I'm sorry. I can't really hear you.
So is there content you shouldn't put in SkyDrive Pro, such as PSTs,
Yeah.
Access databases, things like that?
So certainly you can put all your content that you'd like. All the content that's important to you can go into SkyDrive Pro. We don't have, so the one concern that you have around like a PST file, they can get very big. We don't have differential sync for files like that. So our differential sync is focused on Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files. So you can go ahead and put those things in there, but the greatest experience you're going to get is with the Office apps. Yeah, I will. I will do that until we get that microphone situated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So SkyDrive Pro does work in a hybrid solution. So depending on, you can deploy the web experience as part of the My Site experience in SharePoint 2013. So if you deploy that on-prem, you can use the SkyDrive Pro Sync client against that on-prem. But you can also use that SkyDrive, that very same SkyDrive Pro Sync client against sites in the cloud as well. So you can have it in, you can have content in both places that you are synchronizing to your desktop. Correct. The only thing, you'll have to make sure that you've got your creds. Sometimes you may be challenged with, you have to enter your credentials. That's it. And those may, in some organizations, those are sometimes different credentials. Next question. Yeah. So we don't support check-in, check-out from desktop. The question was, do we support check-in, check-out from desktop?
Hey, this is really cool. A couple questions about sharing. So,
yeah.
For example, if I'm on the desktop and I drag a file from my personal SkyDrive into the Shared with Everyone folder, well, I assume that sharing change will be made on the server as well?
So can you repeat that question?
Can I drag a file on the desktop in Windows Explorer from a file that's a personal SkyDrive file into the Shared with Everyone folder?
Of SkyDrive Pro?
Right.
Yeah.
And it gets shared with everyone.
Yeah, it'll get, so that file, what we'll do is we'll put it into the Shared with Everyone folder. If you're offline, the upload will pend. When it moves into, when you get connectivity back, we'll upload that file and it will be available for everyone.
Great. And the other question is, in Dropbox, for example, if I share a folder with someone, you can't share individual files, but if I share a folder with you, you get an accept notice, and if you accept it, it shows up in the root of your Dropbox hierarchy. So in this, you showed sharing a file with someone, but if you're the recipient of a shared file, how are you notified of it, and where does the file show up? Yeah, so you're notified as part of, you're notified in email. I need some water. No water.
You guys are slave drivers. No, so if I share a file or a folder with you, you'll receive a notification in email. If it's a file and we've got a web companion for it, so it's Word, Excel, PowerPoint, I'll be able to actually launch right into that web companion experience from the email notification. If I share a folder with you, that'll bring me to the folder in the web experience. As of today, we don't have, so I know what you're talking about with Dropbox, where I share a folder with you, and then that folder is now something that looks kind of like it's yours, and then also looks like it's mine. We don't have any concept of that. The way that you would navigate back to that folder, there's actually a couple different options. You can synchronize that library. That folder is shared with you, and you'll just see the folder that's shared with you. That's one option. The other option is you can navigate to it in the web experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first one is about handling the security. Like if we have a different permission level, how does it handle? The second one is about... So
I want to be clear. Let's go through them one at a time. The first question is, how do we handle different permission levels?
Yes.
So from the sharing dialog that you saw, there are just the two permission levels, can edit and can view. Yes. And those, for purposes of the folks in this audience, those roughly map to contribute and I think designer. So one of them you can't make edits. One of them you can. That's roughly what we map to, but they are actually discrete permission buckets. I would say if you've got more questions on that, definitely attend the sharing seminar, the sharing session tomorrow. They're going to go really in depth and talk about how it actually works behind the scenes. So that was question one.
So how about IAM enabled? RMS, right management service?
I can't hear your question, I'm sorry.
RMS, IAM enabled.
So you've got an RMS library?
Yes.
Yeah, we do not synchronize RMS libraries.
So we'll automatically disable it.
So the sync button will be disabled, yes.
Okay. How about the selective sync? Like you can select any content or anything you want. If you don't want it to download it to your local site. Yeah, so the question was, how do we handle selective sync? So there's a subset of files or folders that I'm interested in a particular document library. We do not support selective sync today. It's something that we have heard a lot. But for this release, we really wanted to focus on getting a really great sync experience before we started to then add additional knobs and bells and whistles onto it. One last question.
Yeah.
It's about the resume break. Do you support it? Like, when if I go offline or the connection's not so good.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the first part of the question?
The resume break.
Resume break.
Yes.
So that would be I've synchronized a library at some point, I disconnect it,
Yes.
can I reconnect it? We don't support that today.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, I had a question similar with the sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have rights to a site
Yep.
to read,
Yep.
and you do not,
Yep.
and I share it with you,
Mhm.
and I give you edit, will I have the option to give you edit?
So site sharing is a little bit different than document level sharing. So with site sharing, if you have access to like read the site and you don't have access to grant access, and you go to share with me, that will actually, you're going to submit what's called a permissions request on my behalf. So you're going to submit a notice to the person who has the ability to grant access that says, hey, I'd like to give Richard Scrow access. I thought his presentation was awesome. He needs to see these documents. And then the admin will step back and say, okay, either I'm going to approve this or I'm going to say, you know what, no, there's no way. But there's going to be, like I said, the sharing session goes really in depth into these things. So, yeah.
And then the other question had to do with if the content is in, say, a document library that's on a site.
Yep.
I've drag and drop it into the pro side.
Yep.
Does that then store it in two different locations? So say it was a 4 meg file, it's now 8 meg total storage?
So if the question is, if I have a file and I'm synchronizing from a team site and I've got a document library, I take a file from that team site and drag and drop it into SkyDrive Pro. Does that make a copy of the file or does that actually just drag and drop? It is a drag and drop, so it's like a cut and paste. So you drag and drop it. It's just like Windows Explorer. We move it, we remove it from the team site, and then we put it into your SkyDrive Pro. So if it's a 4 meg file in the team site, it's going to be a 4 meg file in SkyDrive Pro, and the total storage is going to be 4 megs.
Okay, so it's cut and paste. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just two quick questions. Was
Yep.
large files like videos, like HD videos, which range from 500 megs to a gig, like how that performs compared to?
Yeah, so we do perform well. We're working to increase the limit to, I think it's 500 megs today. We're working to increase that limit on upload. Those things, they perform reasonably well. There's not any major concerns with like working with large files. As we said, it does support 7 gigs of storage, so we're working to increase the amount, or the total file size that you can upload in any given thing. But there's no particular concerns. The sync is pretty much linear.
But it's a 500 meg max per file?
It is 500 meg max per file, yeah, today.
Just the other one was, especially in the small medium business space, if you're like a small business owner and you have a 365 account,
Yeah.
and then someone else invites you, shares you to their account, and then you either intentionally or accidentally hit sync again, to these multiple sites, how's that parsed on your?
So if I share with you, and like I've got my small business, you've got your small business, I share with you, if I share a file with you, and it's got to be external sharing unless you are a member, like unless I can go in and have you as part of my O365 user store, you're not going to be able to go to the site. So I'll share with you, if you're an external party like Joe at Gmail, you will only have access to the web companion version of the file. You won't be able to navigate back into the hierarchy to see the actual document library, so you'd never get to sync. If you manually entered your credentials in, or if you went to the sync client and said, hey, sync this site, you'd be prompted, you'd have to authenticate when you wouldn't be able to authenticate against that server because you didn't have a 365 account that was part of that user store, you wouldn't be able to synchronize. So does that answer your question?
So even if you share like the whole site with, let's say it's a business partner or
Yeah.
something, and you have your own, either share the whole site or a whole library with that other person, and you're the other person, and you see
we're pushing the bounds of my expertise when we start to talk about site sharing. So I'd encourage you to save that question for the Tuesday presentation on sharing.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Question about SharePoint Workspace, and
Yep.
I'm just wondering what's the story with that? Because with SharePoint Workspace, I guess even with Groove, we could take sites and not just documents, but I guess not even calendars, but those kind of things offline. And is SkyDrive just for the document part? And where is the offline capability for lists and libraries and things like that?
Yeah. So one of the things. So the question was, what's the story with SharePoint Workspace? So SharePoint Workspace, as you may know, is cut. SharePoint Workspace is no longer part of Office. It's still available as part of 2010. If those features and functionality are of interest to you, if you're still using it, you're an active user of either the SharePoint Workspace functionality or the Groove Workspace functionality that was part of the 2010 offering, that functionality will work side by side with SkyDrive Pro. So there's a There's, I think, one patch that you have to install, but it's up on TechNet. You can get up and running with it quite easily. To your question around, okay, great, there's all this other stuff that you used to be able to sync. You don't sync it anymore. What's up? Our vision was to provide a really, really great solution around document sync. The context that we were coming into, it's a huge area that users really need to be able to do this quick, lightweight, effective sync and collab. And we really wanted to nail that scenario. And we didn't want to have a lot of confusion where you've got 2 or 3 different sets of sync client apps. So we doubled down our bet on the SkyDrive Pro sync client app.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first one is off of that one. So let's say a customer has SharePoint 2010, and they migrate on. Sorry about that.
I think that was actually my fault, but
Okay. Maybe it was
there we are.
But if they upgrade Office to 2013,
Yeah.
is it a supported scenario for the client version of SkyDrive Pro 2013 to connect to SharePoint 2010?
That is not a supported scenario.
Okay. And the second question is, I had heard somewhere we did some differential synchronization with non-Office files. Is that true?
Yeah. So there is some remote differential compression, but it depends. The matrix is super, there's a bunch of different file types that we handle bits and pieces for, but it's not really as clean a story as what we talked about for Word, Excel, and for PowerPoint. So it's a technology known as remote differential compression, and it's like for text, in video, and a few other things, but it's not anywhere near as clean because each file type has its own different parsing that we use.
Okay.
But there is some notion of it. I wouldn't say it's as efficient as what we do for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and nor would I say it's as clean cut as, okay, it's just the first second of the video if you make a change there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My question is just in relation to what happens to versions, create date, and metadata if you're moving documents from an existing team site and also, permissions from an existing team site into a SkyDrive.
Yeah, so the question was what happens to versions, metadata, and permissions as I move from an existing team site into another team site or into SkyDrive Pro? Is it?
SkyDrive Pro.
Into SkyDrive Pro. So when you move into SkyDrive Pro, that's it. It's that document that you've got, the versions, the permissions, any metadata that you had on it. None of that travels with the document. You're starting fresh in SkyDrive Pro.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's say that I've installed my thick client app to synchronize my files from either the Office 365 or my on-premise to my personal computer. So I have a copy of those files in my computer.
Yep.
So I leave the company and my access is turned away. What happened to my files in my computer at home?
I'm sorry, can you repeat like half of that question? Or just start from the topic? I'm sorry, I'm really having still trouble hearing guys asking questions.
So if I synchronize to my home computer,
Yeah.
so I have a copy of the files in my computer.
Okay, so if you synchronize SkyDrive Pro
Correct.
to your home computer.
So I leave the company wherever,
Yeah.
or my access gets cut off, or my Active Directory gets access terminated. What happened to my files in my computer?
Yep, the files, so the question is, I'm synchronizing stuff to my personal machine. For whatever reason, I'm no longer with the company. What happens to the stuff that's on machine? You can no longer synchronize it, but you still have that content as part of your machine. You just will no longer be able to authenticate.
So the copy stays there in my computer.
Say that again?
The copy stays in my computer.
The copy, yes, correct. The copy stays. We don't have any support right now for like remote wipe or your account is terminated and we're going to go nuke everything that's on
So
here.
what happens to the people that I share the files with? Will they still have access?
The people who you shared your files with, it depends on if the company decommissions your MySite or not. If your MySite is still active, if your SkyDrive Pro is still active, those folks will still have access to it. As we said at the outset, it's just a document library. It's got some special features and functionality, but it's still just a document library. So as long as that persists, the people who have access to it will continue to have access to it.
So last quick question. So one of the common scenarios, most people want to share files with people outside the company. Is there any way to either search or find out all the files that somebody or an email has access to?
Yeah, so the question is, if I share externally, who's got access? Can I query who's got access to the stuff that's outside of my organization? So I want you to go ask this question at the sharing presentation tomorrow because I may get it wrong here, but it's my understanding that when you make an external sharing gesture, if you share by the anonymous link that we saw, that's it. there's no way for us to keep track of everybody who could have access to it, because anyone who's got access to that link has access to that document. If you share but require sign-in, so you can share with Joe at Outlook, but require him to sign in, he'll have to sign in and have to get an O365 account. So he'll be, if you look in the permissions page, he'll be listed as an external user, but you'll be able to see him in there. So from the organizational standpoint, yes, if sign-in is required. No, if it's just the anonymous link. But do go ask that question tomorrow, because I'm not 100%.
Does it work with external blob storage?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Does it work with external blob storage?
Does what have external blob storage?
Does it work with blob storage?
Yeah, so in terms of remote blob store, it's like I said, it's just like any other document library. So if you want to move the blob store elsewhere, sync will still work.
What's the underlying storage paradigm in SkyDrive Pro? Is it a SQL database?
It's the same thing like a regular document library. But you can, so there's still the remote blob store that you can do as part of SharePoint. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, I'm sorry.
In my work, I'm working with many projects. So I need to synchronize to many sites.
Yep.
I might end with hundreds or even thousands of documents in my SkyDrive. How can I organize them?
So the question is, I want to synchronize many sites.
How can I organize all the thousands of documents in one SkyDrive?
So you can, well, that's a big question, but there's a lot of different ways that you could go about it. So if you're synchronizing multiple different sites, each one of those is going to show up as a separate entry in the SkyDrive Pro sync client experience. So each one, so site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4, site 5, site 6, site 7. In terms of how can you organize it, you can pick the location at your initial setup where you want to put stuff, but from that point forward, that's where your SkyDrive Pro content looks to go. It does integrate with Windows Desktop Search, so in the case where you've got lots of documents, you can go ahead and use Windows Desktop Search to get access to all of that. Each site that you synchronize will have a different entry in the experience. Yeah, when we sync one site. We don't sync subsites or anything like that. So if you click sync on the root, we're going to sync whatever document library is at the root. If there's some child site or 2 or 3 child sites deep, we won't synchronize those. You've got to go to each site and synchronize those individually.
You said there's no selective sync.
Correct.
What's the limit? How many items can it take?
So you can take 20,000 items offline for SkyDrive Pro when you're syncing that personal experience that we saw. For a non-team or for a non-SkyDrive Pro library, it's a limit of 5,000 items per library. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the app roadmap for Windows RT?
What's the what?
App roadmap for Windows RT.
What's the app roadmap for Windows RT? So you saw what Jeff demoed earlier today. The plan is to get that out, and we'll go from there. Beyond that, we're really focused on delivering a great SharePoint experience, a great SkyDrive Pro experience on Windows 8, and that's going to mean a number of different things, but we really want to make sure that we nail the experience that you saw in today's keynote before we start to think beyond that of other features or functionality that we could bring. Excellent. Client for Android. So as we said, cross-platform experiences are important to us. We're starting with iOS and with Windows 8, and then we'll grow the vision from there.
For admins that can grant access for external links, is that something we can do per user or group, or is that just an on-off switch?
It's essentially when you send that link out, you can send that to anything that's an email address. So you can.
For the admins that can turn it on and off.
Yeah. Oh, for an admin, yeah, you can turn it on and off.
So is it for per user, or is it?
It's a setting in the tenant admin section. So you turn that off, and it's off.
Directly to this, what kind of license do I need to share with everyone?
I am not a licensing expert. I would say definitely chat with your account folks on that, because if I answer that, you're gonna go to your account guy and they're gonna say he's just an engineer. He doesn't know anything about that. So, all right, cool. Well, thanks everybody.